And I am the organizer for the Stark 912 Patriots here in Canton, Ohio. We meet at the 356 Fighter Group on the second and fourth Mondays of every month. So before we start our presentation, I'd ask you to rise as we say the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to begin the evening with the introduction of Rebecca Heimlich. She's from the Americans for Prosperity. And I welcome Rebecca.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks for co-hosting this event with us. We really appreciate it. I'm the Ohio State Director of Americans for Prosperity. For those of you guys who may not be familiar with AFP, we're a nationwide grassroots free market organization. And all that means is we essentially do the same thing that Ralph's group does and that other liberty groups and Tea Parties across Ohio do. We essentially want to keep the government out of our liberties and our pocketbooks. We feel that smaller government is better government. So pretty much everything we do, we partner with local groups like the Stark 912 Patriots. So we've been traveling all across Ohio doing these taxpayer town halls. Just a little more background on AFP. We're nationwide. We have chapters in 31 states. We have members in all 50 states, over 1.8 million. Here in Ohio, we have over 62,000 members. And we're thrilled to have groups like Ralph's work with us. We started these town halls in the middle of August for two reasons. The first is because there is a ton of misinformation I'm sure you guys have heard out there about State Issue 2, which is Senate Bill 5. And forgive me for starting off a little basic, but Senate Bill 5 was the bill back in March of this year that was passed and that reformed some of the collective bargaining laws, and that is now on the ballot this fall. And the question is whether or not we're going to keep Senate Bill 5, whether it will be repealed or not. And to keep Senate Bill 5, we need a vote yes on State Issue 2 to keep the bill. A vote no would be a vote to repeal it. So we, as Americans for Prosperity, are going to be urging you tonight to vote yes on State Issue 2, and we're going to explain why. So the two reasons that we've been doing the town halls are, one, to dispel some of the misinformation. To give you an example, I was on the radio not too long ago up in Lake County, and I was talking in favor of State Issue 2, and on the other side was Senator Brown, and he was opposed to State Issue 2. And he said, I just think this is wrong because I think that, we shouldn't get rid of collective bargaining and we shouldn't, get rid of the health care benefits and the pensions of our government workers. Well, none of those things are true. Doesn't do any of those things. So I'm just going to assume that he was focusing on national issues and was misinformed on this issue. The other reason is because, the other reason we're doing the taxpayer town halls is, what I found as we've traveled across the state this year is that people seem to think, if I'm not a teacher, or I'm not a firefighter, or I'm not a police officer, or if I'm not pro-union or anti-union, why should I care about State Issue 2? How does it affect me? So that's the purpose of the taxpayer town hall that we're doing tonight, that we've been doing across the state, is to let people know how, as taxpayers, it's going to affect you. We want to let you know what's going on in Ohio, how there's a threat of higher taxes because of government spending that's out of control, and a lot of that has to do with personnel costs. If you do just a quick Google search, you can see that lots of local governments, lots of schools across Ohio are saying we can't make ends meet and we need to raise taxes. Who in here wants higher taxes? Anyone? See, I've asked this at lots of town halls. No one ever raises their hand. I hear there's someone in Ohio who actually, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I know a couple of people who are going to get affected by the State Issue 2 want higher taxes on them.
Well, that's true. I will agree with you. But we're going to explain tonight how without State Issue 2, State Issue 2 will give us the power to make our elected officials more accountable and there will be more transparency, so we'll have a greater say as taxpayers in how our tax dollars are spent. And I agree. I think that's good for everybody across the board in Ohio, and that's the message that we're trying to get across. This is our 9th town hall. We started out in Cincinnati on the east side. We've also been to the west side. We've been to Chesterville, Troy, Tiffin, Mount Vernon, Norwalk, Zanesville. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. Tomorrow night we're in Toledo. Next week we're in Kettering and Inglewood. The week after we're in Dover. So we're just going across the state, trying to get the word out.
Who's paying for all the travel?
We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. It's all from donations. We're going to have
Who?
we have over 80,000 donors across the country. I can't list for you who they are. Randy Newman gives money. Thank you. Great, thank you. There's some right there, speaking of. Thank you. We are going to have a portion of the evening tonight that is going to be for audience questions. What's going to happen first is in just a minute, I'm going to turn the program over to Seth Morgan, who many of you probably already know. He's going to be our moderator this evening. He'll introduce the panel. The panel's each going to have a few minutes to give a statement, and then Seth's going to lead them through some questions, and then you guys will have an opportunity to ask the panel questions. And the way we're going to do that is I have these cards, and I will hand them out throughout the program. If at some point you think you have a question you want to ask, just raise your hand. I'll give you a card. You can write it down. We will pick them up, and we will ask questions as long as you guys are willing to stay here tonight, or until Ralph tells us we have to leave, or the school tells us we have to leave. But we want to get all your questions answered. So I'm gonna turn it over now to Seth, and then he is also going to explain to you at the end, but I'm going to mention it briefly now. We have some materials out front. This one, sorry, struck my cards. This one, it has a green top. I know you can't see it very well here. If after hearing our town hall tonight, you support Issue 2 and want to help us get the word out, please fill one of these out and let us know. We also have just gotten door hangers on both Issue 2 and on Issue 3. And would love to have people do walking in support of these. We have a few out there tonight. We can get a lot more to Ralph in the next week. So I'm going to turn over to Seth now. Seth Morgan, who is a former state representative, and before that, he was a city council member in Huber Heights, actually the youngest city, I keep dropping the card, sorry. Actually, the youngest city council member ever to be elected in Huber Heights, also the youngest vice mayor ever in Huber Heights. When he was on the council of Huber Heights, he actually accomplished a tax decrease, which is not something that we often hear. As a state representative, he fought for smaller government and transparency in government, so much so that he sued Governor Strickland over transparency in education. I think he deserves a round of applause for that. Good job. He also, along with his public service, has his own CPA firm. He's also the CFO for several companies, and I'm very happy to say that he is also the Ohio Policy Director for Americans for Prosperity. Seth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and it's nice to be back with the Stark 912 group. Good to see you each. I'm glad we're here as taxpayers and people concerned about the issues that we face together. Rebecca did a great job of opening us up, so I'm not going to repeat everything that she said, but I do encourage you now to start thinking about those questions that you have. As the panel starts to talk through the issues, I encourage you to think about the questions. As questions and answers are happening, I encourage you to think about your questions, because as she said, as long as we can be here, we will. If you're for Issue 2, we want to hear from you. If you're not for Issue 2, we still want to hear through the cards that you're provided, the questions you ask. We'll do our best to get to them. I want to just briefly say before I introduce the panel that, as Rebecca pointed out, we've been all over the state, and we're going to continue to go all over the state. Because as this panel discussion has been named, this is really about our future together as a state. There's a ton of emotion surrounding this issue, and certainly there are individuals, as you will perhaps hear tonight through the Q&A period, that perhaps are going to be impacted by this. Not directly as a result of Senate Bill 5 or State Issue 2, but perhaps directly as a result of the reforms that are allowed to take place inside that bill. In other words, this bill has nothing to do with private unions. It has nothing to do with an automatic reduction in pay for certain individuals, unless those individuals are in a bargaining agreement that, frankly, is going to get renegotiated when it's renegotiated under the new framework provided by the state. And you're going to hear more about that. So you cannot pay a police officer. I see a couple of our finest in the back, and I appreciate their service. You can't pay. Thank you. You can't pay a police officer enough money to walk up to that dark car on a dark night with people with guns and drugs in the car. And you can't pay a firefighter enough money to run into a burning building, or a teacher for that matter. I have 3 children. Who's going to teach your kids, or my kids, or the future. We often say that of the next generation, the next generation of leaders. You can't pay these individuals necessarily enough. The question is not around the individual units bargaining or the individual professions. The question is around a mathematics problem. And if there was a phrase that I wanted you to leave here with tonight, it's really a mathematics problem. Now, we may disagree on how we solve the mathematics problem we have, which you're going to hear more about, but we do indeed have a mathematics problem. Private employment has declined way too much. Public employment has stayed relatively even. You've got less people paying just as much, if not more, of a bill, which you will hear about. Now, for some people, they may like that. For other people, they may not. And as Rebecca pointed out, in most cases, most people would agree that higher levels of taxation drive jobs away. And you can see that pretty consistently throughout the United States as you look at the states and how they rank and compare. That's really the question we face together as Ohioans, not as union members or non-union members or Republicans or Democrats or anything else. This is a mathematics problem that we have to address. And so I hope you buckle in and hang on. There may be points of passion throughout the engagement tonight. I hope they are kept to a minimum and that we focus really on the problem at hand and that each of you leave, although we've all made up our minds up here and are going to be encouraging you to support this, that you leave a little better armed for the conversation that's going to take place just 34 days from now on November 8th, when Ohio decides whether or not this is part of the reform package that they will use to take back their future, one way or the other. Because it's a question that we're going to have to answer, whether it's through this or some other form or higher taxation or layoffs or whatever that case is, we're going to have to answer this question because money, last I checked, doesn't grow on trees except in Washington, and we're figuring out that even in Washington that can only be sustained for a few years. So I'm grateful you're here. As Rebecca mentioned, I did serve as a council member in Huber Heights, which is a large suburb, about the size of Canton, of Dayton, for 7 years. And let me just say, I'm not here to talk about myself, but having served in a situation where there were multiple collective bargaining units and a government that was kind of just going along and getting along because there wasn't the type of financial crisis that is driving some of these reforms today, that this issue in particular is close to my heart because the local governments on the ground, which is where the largest part of our new financial crisis rests, at least in Ohio, are those that are going to have the most ability and the most responsibility over the next couple of years to deal with the financial problems that we see in our governments. It's going to be your school, in your city, in your county, in your township, in your village. Right now, Ohio law is not conducive to dealing with the reforms that they may need to enact in order to take control of their budgets again. I'm going to introduce the panel, and just to remind you again of the ground rules, we're going to give them after the introduction a few minutes to make an opening statement. We'll then move into some questions that we have prepared. But as you go through that, I encourage you to get your questions on a card. Our promise to you is that we will do our best, unless it's completely outlandish and inappropriate, to get your question answered as best as we can. So let me start by introducing the two that we have here, and I'll bring the third up in a minute. We've got Melanie Elsey here. Melanie I knew when I served in the state legislature. She works as the legislative director for the American Policy Roundtable, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy organization founded in 1980. She also serves as the state director for Eagle Forum of Ohio. She's a former teacher in public schools. Her work today primarily focuses on researching public policy and communicating with state and federal legislators regarding the impact on families and communities. For the last 20 years, she has attended the monthly meetings of the State Board of Education and has addressed changes in state educational policies at the invitation of more than 300 local communities since 1993. I consider her a friend. She's a very smart lady. Give it up for Melanie Elsey. Next on the panel, sitting next to her, to Melanie's left, your right, is Dana Adams. Dana is a small business consultant and auditor. He travels the country with a specific focus on healthcare. He at one point managed in a small business which had about 50 employees. He's been doing this for 20 years. And let me just say something about our panel. We don't go for star power necessarily in these panels. That's why I'm up here. If you don't laugh at my jokes tonight, folks, it's just going to be a very long night, whether you like it or not. Thank you. Even if it's not funny, pretend. We don't necessarily go for star power, although, in my opinion, these folks are stars. What we try to do at every panel is to have somebody from kind of the academic research side. We're normally able to have a local elected official.